Nathan, how are you? Good to see you, man.
I'm doing well. I'm doing well, Manny.
Good, good, good. Well, thank you for joining me. So I thought it'd be a refreshing change to have some different people on the JTF podcast. And you're such an interesting guy, and you got such a really key role at JTF. And I just thought, what, it'd be great to have you on the podcast and kind of just talk to you, pick your brain, and see what your thoughts are and where you think things are going and how you see things. And that's part of what I really enjoy about JTF is that, like any company, there's some very interesting people, and you got to sometimes take the time to appreciate and notice what everybody does. But your human development and I believe human performance, right? You're
Right.
the
Yeah.
so
Human performance manager. Yeah.
excuse me, guys. I all the titles are bad, but really, Nate's just an awesome guy, and he trains a lot of the guards that come through JTF, and but much more. Like you do some of the close protection work. Like you've been a big part of JTF, and from what I can see, and you've trained in many different aspects, and it would be wonderful to just kind of hear maybe um, what your thoughts are, maybe like some of your top three or top two do's and don'ts, and about the different things.
Yeah.
So let me try to kind of sum it up for everybody watching the podcast. So the moment you let's say people fill in a resume or they apply to JTF, they go through two interviews. Uh, um, I guess a written interview and then a phone interview, and then there's a visual, and we go through some questions, and then once to complete the hiring, they go through training with you. And that's just kind of to standardize. Like you would have already had to have your license and those kind of things. But um, this is just an extra layer that JTF adds just to make sure that all the guards are on the same spot, right?
Right.
So let's get some background logistics here. So how many guards do you train? You say you've trained, let's say a year. Like if you I had to eyeball it, how many guards do you normally train?
Oh man, that's really tough to predict because it depends on the amount of contracts that we're running. Right.
But on average, let's
Um,
say in the past, based on the past and
we can
stuff.
have we can have up to 100 a year in some cases.
Yeah,
Um, yeah. Our company has kind of grown and changed quite a bit in these last few years too. So
yeah,
it's hard to really be able to reference the past two in terms of what we've expected. And the machine that we're dealing with now is certainly a lot different than it was back then. And
yeah. For
our
all of
training
us.
procedures used to be quite a bit different before. And that's part of the reason that I've been developing these things is because we noticed that the nature of the way that we were running the company worked really well on the small scale. It was really like personality driven. And now that we're getting larger, we need to kind of we have to create tools that allow us to standardize our training to a larger group of people, and that's really what I've been
Yes.
focusing on.
Yeah. No, no. Listen, it's always going to be challenged when you get to a bigger group, but
Yeah.
within that big group, there's smaller groups that will form, and they'll find that. Like I've seen it. It'll
Mm.
happen. I but you but so let's say 100 people, which is really modest. I think it's more than that,
Mm.
um, but nonetheless. So let's say. So somebody gets hired, they come in, they got to do the training with you, and we call it kind of like mod or modular one, right? This like
Right.
the standard. So somebody comes in and I'm assuming because I've seen it quickly, but it's basically just covering off all the check marks as regards to security guard and just making sure that person has all that information, correct?
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, a person would have already gotten their security license. So in some
Yeah.
cases, it's a bit of a review, but it's also like our company's specific interpretation of what the licensing expectations are. So it
Hmm.
relates a little bit more to kind of our company culture and expectations, and the idea is that like what are the things that everyone wishes that they knew when they were first starting out. That's kind of what I'm trying to address in mod 1 is all of that basic stuff. But then in addition to that too, depending on the site that the guard is on, there's also like division specific training or site specific training. So a guard may get hired on, and then there's several of these different training components that they have to go through.
Yeah. No. Listen, it's a great safety check because it allows you, and what separates JTF is just the quality of guard. You're just double checking that they really know their stuff, and also what we expect, because you're right, it is a company culture. There's some people that, the minimum is good enough. A dear cousin of mine, he's an inspector, an actual, he's inspects the quality of electricians' work in Toronto. So basically, he's the inspector for all the electricians in my area, which is huge. And I always ask him, I say, cousin, how's the quality? He goes, the bare minimum to code is what these guys work. He goes,
Right.
He goes, and that's what some people's expectation is. But he goes, but then there's certain companies where that is not the expectation. So so within a certification or within I guess a license, you have the minimum level. Like you wouldn't want the minimum level in the surgeon. You wouldn't want the minimum level.
Right.
So it's really good that you guys do that. But I'm sure you've seen some doozies. So what are no, because this is the good stuff, right? Come on, this is like, on my deathbed, you think my son's going to be asking me the normal stuff? He's going to be asking what's all the fun stuff that you did? What's the crazy stuff? Like what ended up, like what have you seen that just, like, what's the biggest mistake that you've seen in terms of like the guards, either expectation or what they don't understand, or where they're messing it up? What's really their downfall?
Well, the most common thing that in some ways is the hardest to train, and I don't know if this is just a kind of a product of the time that we're going through right now, where everything is sort of online and there's all this social distancing, and a lot of our human interaction is really being challenged. And for a guard, it's like that human component is critical, because you got to be able to talk to people. And if you're like losing social cues, things can fall apart really quick. And so if there's anything that I'm like really trying to address right now, it's that quality particularly. And it's a difficult thing to train, and some people just, they don't have a really strong grasp with where certain boundaries are, because a lot of those boundaries are shifting and changing so much right now. So like, for instance, say I'm running some training with someone and it's over Zoom, and they're like completely unprofessional, laying there on their bed and, look like they haven't changed in a few days or whatever. And it's just like, you're at work or you're working right now. Right.
Yeah.
So that's a part of it. And you can tend to tell too, the people who treat things that way, it can bleed into the work when they're on the job too. So those tend to be the guards. Yeah. Those tend to be the guards who, might have trouble fraternizing with people, or they might, they're not always the most equipped to be able to diffuse certain social situations. And so yeah, the kind of most common doozy that I see is just a kind of lack of professionalism and a lack of appropriate boundaries, because it used to be so formal. It used to be so rigid. You show up at work and you have your uniform, and it was easy to slip into that kind of a mode, but we've lost that now.
Yeah. People got to, listening to this, this is a really important point making here. Really, professionalism is like, I've seen so many well-educated people in my life, like PhDs up the yin yang, but then they're dropping social cues. Do you not see that it takes a real professional to have an expertise knowledge in something, but only use it when it's necessary. Like, only really, like, not everybody wants to hear what you have to say. Like, Jesus, just learn, as a guard, you've got to watch certain things, but you have to pick up on little cues. You got to read between the lines. You have to. That's one of the most important cues for police officers, security guards, PIs. Like, if you don't read between the lines, and for that matter, you've been to some third world countries, you've been to some really, like me, And you better read between the lines. There is nobody explaining anything to you. If you don't pick it up, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. And that's kind of lost. I think we have such a safe society that our guard is down and we don't pick up on it. There's no punishment to it, man. But I've been to some countries where if they ask you a question and you don't answer quickly and specifically, you're in trouble. Like if you hesitate in your answer, you're going to have a big problem, and the police not going to help you. You're in a big problem. These are police that are going to be asking you that question. And you better, and for everybody listening, we're not trying to paint a dark circle, but I mean, here's a real quick story that might support what you're saying. That Canadian astronaut was at Hatfield that was up in space. He was up there and they did a lot of work on him, meaning he took blood samples, urine samples every day. And 2 weeks after he was in space, and he was exercising, I think 3 hours a day, running and up there on a treadmill, on a bike, like lifting weights in space, trying to keep whatever muscle he can, because gravity, it takes that away. So they're trying to see how much exercise would require a person in space to kind of keep his body tone. And they found within 2 weeks there was 3 times the amount of calcium in his blood. So his bones were literally deteriorating after 2 weeks, guys. So if you isolate a person, the social skills are not used for months and a year in this case, there is going to be an impact on you. And anybody that doesn't think that's the case is fooling themselves. So you're right, Nate. So the guard has to really work on those reading between the lines and social cues and understanding their effects. So now, so that's one. Anything else that comes to mind?
I don't know if this is so much like a doozy, but it's sort of related to this idea too, is how I think that our brains are changing is part of what it is. Like, how when we were younger, we knew where everything was just by memory. We had to. And then GPS comes out and suddenly it's like no one knows where any of the roads really lead. They just go where the GPS tells them to, right?
That's scary.
I've noticed with security that there's access to so much more information. You can get, it's easier, I can be at home and looking at security feeds at our contracts on my cell phone, and if an incident happens, it's easy for me to get reports from multiple sources, and there's so much more information, but it tends to be more superficial information. And it's changed from the days where maybe you spent however long sitting there at a site and you have this kind of much closer knowledge of everyone who's involved, and it's easier to make kind of discretionary decisions that way. So we're treating everything more like it's an algorithm, and people are forgetting about discretion. And I think that would really be the next thing, is it's like when people are learning and when people are training, a lot of times they are in many cases approaching it like it's just a matter of learning the right procedures and kind of activating the right algorithm for the right moment. And really what I'm interested in is, how do we get this person to have solid discretion and decision making? Because the procedures will change. They'll, whatever the new COVID rule is, or whatever the new rules are, we need people to be able to make good decisions, and that's a higher priority than anything.
Yeah, that's a big thing. The mere fact that you're saying that, and anybody listening should be aware, this is one of those things. As a guard, as anybody in that line of work, you have to make decisions, and there's no time. Sometimes they've got to be quick. Of course, if times are good, you can make a call, ask for authorization, or you can double check a procedure. But in many cases, there's just not that time. You got to go with your gut. And that is a personal training. That's something that you have to do. And like you talked about, you really talked a lot about professionalism. And that's where, somebody starts a job and it's just a job. But then as they go on, there's the professional version of that, right? There's a professional word, and it's actually no different than anything else. It's just you decided to make it something special.
Yes.
You decided that when I'm doing this job, it means more than just a paycheck. It means I want to do it the best I can. And that no trainer can instill that. That's something that every individual has to say to themselves. I've seen people display it as a janitor and just be unbelievable professional at what they do. And that's just it's this is the very nature of this work. Okay, so what about professionalism? As those listening, I can't harp on that. Professionalism is much. It's the way you dress. It's the way you talk. It's the way you interact with people. It is high level. People can never underestimate. Being a professional can take you further sometimes than education. People make so much of education, but the professionalism, people love being around professional people. They love being around people that have that attitude. So it's a great point that you brought up. What are some amazing things you've seen? What are some stuff that blew you away that maybe you've seen in training?
I don't know if this should necessarily blow me away, but this is always really refreshing is
Okay.
if something happens that's a serious thing, like maybe there's an altercation or something serious happens, and it's like everything works. The person did the right thing, people were kept safe, like the machine functioned properly. And even if it's like, on the one hand, you want to kind of get used to that. Like that's how things obviously should be. They should work, but it's still so great to see every time it happens,
Yeah. So
I enjoy that, how it's like, you could say that all I'll do at certain points is be having conversations with people on Zoom or whatever it is. And maybe that's not a very important thing. However, in that moment where something serious happens, turns out that call was really important. Turns out it's a really good thing we kind of hung around that little nuanced position and made sure that they understand what's the right way to go about this or whatever, because when that moment happens, it can be the difference between someone being heard or some sort of legal case.
Yeah. Well, what's amazing for me that I saw a funny story. I played tons of sports, and I remember I had this football coach. He was just crazy. He was such a funny guy, but he was so serious about his football. And he would draw out this play, and every play was a touchdown. Every single play. It doesn't matter where we were, he drew up that play, and we were scoring. But anybody's ever played football, like American football, right? You're lucky if you make it 10 yards. I mean, the outside there's like one. At this one time, I remember the coach, pulls out a play, and I'm involved in it, and I'm like, okay, fine, the coach is okay. And then we're in the end zone. That's what he says. And I'm like, all right, whatever. He's in the end zone. We're never in the end zone, but that's fine. So I'm in the play, and sure enough, doesn't the whole play go exactly how it's supposed to go? And the guy scored. I'm like, wow, that actually worked like he said it. These are rare. But when they do happen, it's like, wow, that's something special. Now, okay, because that was fun. So talk to me about, okay, so now you've come into JTF, you've been hired, you've gone through Modular 1, you're working for 6 months, whatever it is, and now what are the next levels? Because I mean, there are levels, right? Like we have like a system, I guess, I don't know if it's a badge or patch system that you guys got going on, where maybe tell us briefly about that, how that works.
So I guess something I noted, like when I was young, I entered the security industry, and I noticed pretty quickly that there's kind of like entry level work, and then there's the higher end work, and it can be really hard to get into the higher end work. Those are usually people who have come from other fields and everything. And so while I did security, I was very interested in pursuing other methods of training. So I was, getting my emergency medical responder and kind of constantly updating my martial arts. And that was when I met Valley. And like JTF security started out first and foremost as a training facility. Like we were trainers first, and eventually you develop something enough that you start to put it to use. And that was the situation that we found ourselves in. But training really is, it's the thing that we're good at. And so we've developed this system to try and equip people to go from that entry level position to the more advanced, higher level security work. And again, you don't really see that in the industry. The way that we've set it up is so that there is we're calling them different tiers, or it is like a
Hmm.
patch system. And
Yeah.
externally, people may not necessarily know what's going on. They just see the JTF emblem, but internally within the company, we can look at a person's emblem or badge and know to what degree they've been trained in what sorts of deployment capacities that they have. So it starts off at sort of this um, entry level. They're receiving their mod 1, their basic first aid, their division specific training, and as they put in time, it starts to get more of a supervisory role, and they enter tier 2. So now it's not just them as the individual, but they're having to factor in other people that they may be delegating tasks to. And if they're having to go hands on, they're more equipped to be able to do that. We start to deal with more complicated scenarios, like if there were bomb threats, more
Sure.
unusual things. And then beyond that, at the final tier level, we have this is more like covert, and this is the really specialized stuff. So
Mhm.
these tend to be the people who um, you want like a really special person for it. Like if
Yeah, of
someone's if
course.
someone if someone's doing close protective, you don't always want them to look like a normal security guard, and they got to be able to blend in whatever environment they're in.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we're at that point, it's like, okay, you understand the industry well enough. Now you know when to make to recognize certain exceptional situations. You got to be able to think outside the box. You got to be able to just adapt and roll with these really wonky situations that might come up. So um,
100%.
yeah, so we can, within the company, we can look at people and see where they fall in that sort of scheme of things.
Yeah, there's tons. You couldn't have said it better, and it was perfect. A lot of people don't understand when it comes to close protection. Most of the bodyguards, most of the operatives, you don't see them. They just look like normal people. They're men, women, old, young. You'd be so surprised. They blend right in, and that's their role. They're supposed to
Right.
blend in, and they're really their main role for most of the bodyguards is preventative. If something happens, it's already a problem.
Hmm.
Like you do not want anything that when somebody's hiring you for close protection, they want nothing to happen.
Hmm.
That's their main goal. They don't, the fact that you're good at martial arts and that's all secondary. They don't
Yeah.
care.
Yeah.
They, like I always say, think of it like your kids. You never bring your kids anywhere where there's even the potential of danger.
Hmm.
You don't even want to even enter that. Like if you're protecting, you don't even want to think about what if somebody has a leg and you have the arm. Like like I don't even want to imagine that. Like it's so
Right.
and that's a real professional approach. That's not the one that's on Hollywood, but that's the most important one. So and you're right. You are at that point. You're cherry picking for the qualities that you need.
Hmm.
Somebody that just, it was the same on sports teams. I used to see the coaches. They would pick character players, especially if you really wanted an elite team.
Hmm.
You needed role players. Everybody knew what was expected, and the captain was usually the quiet guy, just getting stuff done, not necessarily the most talented person there,
Hmm.
right? So very similar. And I've seen you and Valerie doing some crazy jobs and missions. It's wonderful. We're not going to talk about them today for sure, but the idea is that it really is cool stuff. I mean, the company is not full of CEOs and VPs and directors that don't do this stuff. We do
Hmm.
this stuff. And
Hmm.
that's what I think makes it such a special place. We're not far removed from this. So I really think it's super interesting. And some of the reasons I always tell people is that just look at the people around us. There's some interesting, real interesting people that you can meet at JTF for sure.
Yeah.
And any other thing in terms of training that you'd add into all of this?
Just if I can jump in there really quick, I'm finding too that a lot of the industry itself, the traditional way of approaching these things is very much through a particular field. It's through this very particular credentialed system, and it's criminology and psychology, and someone does jujitsu. That's sort of like the cookie cutter, the cookie cutter elite guard, or maybe they're former military or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and I think what we've managed to do is that, like, we most certainly have those components as well. We're coming from those angles too, but in addition to that, there's Valley and his experience with the fire departments, and I've had experience with the social work field and all of our
Yes.
traveling. And so we're really well equipped to be able to see what the current operating paradigm is. But I think we do a really good job at seeing outside of that as well. And if we need to, like, okay, right now we're not thinking like a security person because that's not the solution to this particular issue. And if we act like a security person here, this is going to actually make the problem worse. So let's change our tactics a little bit here, and let's, come at this from a different angle or whatever. I think our company is really well equipped to engage in that sort of meta-analysis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No. That's a great point. Hey, it's not a small point. It's a big, like, I think some of that makes people the most interesting is the little things they do. It's actually their hobbies that give them a deep perspective of what things are. It's like watching a guy that just loves to fly fish. But if anybody's ever been fly fishing, it's the most frustrating thing you could ever do. It's so detailed oriented. That rubs off on other aspects of their life. Like, and a firefighter is and that's what Valley does as well, right? And it's amazing to have his lens and his eyes to see, here you've done 25 plus years of martial arts, here you've done security, here you've done like the stuff you've seen in your head. When you show up to a scene, you have so many different lenses. It's amazing. And it makes you make good decisions because it puts you into perspective, right? It's really important. It's a great point you made for sure. Because like you said, jiu-jitsu, some criminology, psychology. I never seen it that way, but it's true. It's so
not
bad.
it's not to knock any of those things, right? But it's like with say martial arts, right? And say, I know that things have changed with MMA and everything, right? But say there was a time where everyone was doing karate and they trained in a way where everyone is punching straight at them with this very specific technique. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason that people would train that way. But all it takes is for someone to move in a way that's really outside the box. And then suddenly those particular techniques aren't really applicable. And, that streamlined way of doing things with the criminology, jiu-jitsu, psychology, that it's like, there's definitely reasons that those things are useful, but you have to be able to also see their limitations and step outside of those fields too. And the more that people are specializing, the more they're getting trapped in these paradigms because we have so much access to information. People are going to school for so long, they're receiving so much training that they're kind of losing their connection with the more general, grounded, practically applicable side of things.
And that's where I've always felt that people need a balance of real work and education. You should never be allowed to go that far off because you could have a double PhD and be an absolute moron. I'm sorry, guys. You're not going to be grounded. You need to be grounded, and real life grounds it. My experience with this is the first time we hauled a guy down, and a guy very similar to the guy you described. This is the first time somebody tried to take a bite out of his arm, right? And or the guy tried to rip the guy's eye out.
Yep.
And arrest. I was like, oh, you forgot everything. I was ready. I was already prepared for this, and I could see how my training allowed me to be way more adaptive. I get it, but just guys, take into. I always tell people this idea of adaptation. I want to make a few changes to boxing, Nathan. Okay, so I'm going to make a few rules that I'd like to change for Vegas. I say, you know what? Next boxing fight we have, I'm going to allow the referee to throw one punch around, but we don't know who. He's not going to say, just one punch. You don't know where it'll be. How would that change boxing?
That's a big difference. Yeah.
It's a big one punch, just around, like, and then also once in a while, every other round, no real formal. We're just going to shut the lights off for 3 seconds. That's it. That's it. You just need that for 3 seconds.
Yeah.
So what do you think is going to happen in 3 seconds? Every rule that could possibly be broken will be broken.
Right.
Because nobody's looking.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the same thing in real life. The moment nobody's looking, everything is going to happen, and it'll be illegal. It'll just piss you right off. I just changed 2 little things.
Right.
And like, guys, and the real world is a million things can change.
Right.
And if you can't adapt, you're finished. You're finished. You have to be able to adapt. And that's why before it goes down that road, if you've used your voice, your mannerisms, you read the situation, you've calmed the situation down, you've de-escalated, you've been a professional, that's far less likely to happen.
Right, right.
Far less likely to happen, and that's what you want.
Hmm.
Less likely. You can't eliminate it, but the training part of a guard is that's a maturation, is that you look for the easiest way and the simplest things, and to just get through your day in a smooth way, I
Hmm.
guess, right, rather than the hard way. So it's thanks to guys like you, man. I know you're in the same headspace as me, and I think that comes across in your training. And it's kind of a thankless job in some ways, because you're not. It's no, it's hard. I've trained people for years, and it's difficult sometimes. You do a lot of good work, and um, just know that people do see it. I do, for sure, and I think that's what makes JTF so cool, is that you're really grounded, and you know your stuff. You're not just you're not just did it 20 years ago.
Right.
You still do it to this day, and
Yeah.
that makes it quite special. And so I thank you for that, man, and I thank you for the time on the podcast. And I think this is a cool. I'm glad we did it, and hope we do it again. Maybe we'll do it again another couple of months if you come up with some more interesting ideas.
Yeah, well, just I was thinking too, the really nice thing about the security industry as well is that you actually have the time to really truly become a professional. Like with
Yeah.
the electrician, right? There's so much pressure to um,
Oh yeah.
get as many contracts done as you can or whatever. So it's like people are cutting corners and they're rushing because they're trying to beat out the competition who's going to, so like everyone's undercutting everyone and everyone's,
So
that's
bad.
the
So
nature of the industry. But with security, unless it's a really chaotic environment, like if you're doing event security and there's concerts and there's a lot going on, you tend to have the time to really be able to think about what's happening, to really
yeah.
be able to read people and get good at what it is that you're there for. And it's like you have every opportunity to become excellent at that. And some people refine that, and other people just,
Yeah.
they don't care, and teach their own, I guess, right?
No, no, try refine. That's the secret to
Yeah,
life, is try
yeah,
try make it better a little bit. Everything you do. So thanks so much, Nate. I can't say thanks enough. Thank you for this. We'll do it again, I'm sure, soon. Okay.
yep. Thanks for the conversation, Manny.
All of us. Thanks again. Bye, guys.